So, I mean, as I say, I'm going to just do a proper sort of deep dive, really start all the way from the beginning, and going back to I think it's New Jersey, back in the day.
Yeah, before The Sopranos.
Before The Sopranos.
Before we all spoke like The Sopranos.
I bet there was an Uncle Junior around somewhere, though.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But in terms of when you were kind of growing up, and I don't know what your aspirations were when you were growing up in terms of what you thought you were going to be when you grew up.
I thought I was going to be either a lion or a horse.
Yeah.
I didn't understand that wasn't possible till I was about 9 years old.
And what were the kinds of sort of shows or films that you really enjoyed when you were growing up? And was there any that kind of relate to what you ended up doing?
Yeah, I saw the usual Hollywood stuff, and I liked some of it. Some of the Warner Brothers shorts, and with Disney, I always tended to like the darker bits, like from the first Fantasia, Night on Bald Mountain, thrilled me. The Sorcerer's Apprentice with Mickey Mouse, I think it was the first time he had pupils in his eyes, but I really liked it. But there was some unusual things I saw. On the local kiddie television station. Somehow they'd gotten hold of footage by Lottie Reiniger, who made one of the very first animated films, a cutout picture called Adventures of Prince Ahmed. And, this cutout is a cousin of stop motion, just in 2D instead of 3D. And I found those bits that they showed mesmerizing. It was all silhouette. And so it sort of drew you in to imagine what the rest of the characters looked like and so forth. And then maybe the most important event was when I was about 5 years old. My mother took me to see a Ray Harryhausen film, Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. And the monsters in that, especially the Cyclops, but the dragon, and there was a battling skeleton, seemed absolutely real to me. I had nightmares about the Cyclops. We had a large fish tank in our house with tropical fish, but in my dreams, the Cyclops was growing ever larger in the tank. And when he was going to break out, he was coming after me. But by the time he got that big, I'd made peace with the Cyclops. I think it's Coraline in particular, it scared a lot of kids. Maybe they thought they were too young, but some 7-year-olds, 9-year-olds, it was very scary, but then they grow up loving it. That's how it was with me and Harryhausen and Harryhausen's monsters.
And I think when you look at the kind of Harryhausen world, particularly when you're an adult, you can see there are imperfections there, and you can see the fact that it's not like now we're so used to sort of this shiny CGI.
Yeah.
But actually, from my point of view as a viewer, and I think this is what people love about stop motion, is you love the fact that you know that somebody's been touching it and moving it. There's a sort of humanity. Ray has channeled himself through that creature to make it, rather than, I'm not putting down CGI because that's an incredible thing and working in a very different way. Well, you can. You're allowed to. I might have somebody from CGI on the stage next week, so I definitely can't. But in terms of that sort of that human sort of tactility, it's something that you can. It's tangible, isn't it?
I will say this about CGI. CGI can do anything. What they've chosen to do still remains a very narrow area for the animated films. There's so much more that could be done in terms of designing types of stories. Anyway, I made my point. What was the question?
Interestingly, I mean, you were in Annecy this year where they played a short AI film which was booed by the audience. But I think before they even played it because people were so upset at the thought of it. But from your point of view, it's another part of technology that ultimately we just probably should embrace. Is that what?
No, never.
No.
AI has its place. AI for medical advances. I sat with someone on the plane ride to Annecy who was talking about how they were using AI to much more quickly take someone's blood who has cancer and then figure out which antibodies to manufacture, not just for that individual, but then how do they make it universal?
Yeah.
So that's one great use. The other great use I've seen is making fake trailers for movies. I saw these trailers like, Raiders of the Lost Ark. What if it was made in 1940? What if it was made in 1960? And they're bizarre. And the hairstyles change and the costumes change. And they're just wonderful. So those are two good uses.
And apart from that,
Yeah,
it's done.
yeah.
And the point that led us to that before was we were just talking about that kind of that humanity that comes through the manipulation of like a stop motion
Yeah.
puppet in the way that AI could never reproduce.
Yeah, look what Ray Harryhausen was able to do. And it goes back to his mentor, Willis O'Brien, who did the first King Kong. And that was a mentor, someone Ray Harryhausen learned from. That as crude as the animation might look in comparison to what's come since, the characters had a soul. The monsters had a soul. They had a personality. You cared about them. I mean, when King Kong is murdered by those flying airplanes, it's like a horrible, sad moment in cinema history. It's just hard to imagine, though, going back to the time when it came out, people absolutely believed that was a real thing, just as I had when I saw the Ray Harryhausen work when I was young. I think we've had so many years of perfectly done CG-generated effects. I remember every few years to be a huge breakthrough. Oh, they can do liquids now. They can do hair. They can do fur. I mean, those used to be challenges. But we've had so many years of that, it doesn't quite have the value. The cost of doing it has come down so that even the most mundane TV series could have amazing effects. That's okay. But stop motion, at its heart, it still needs to have a sense of being touched by an artist directly. And I battle with that all the time on my own films, even back on, never on Nightmare. We didn't have many things to help us. We didn't have any digital whatever. If we wanted something to fly or jump, we didn't have a rig we could paint out later. We had to put it on spider wires to move it. But coming back to stop motion in Coraline, it was, why are we doing this? How much charm do we have? Or is it a mistake? It's a never-ending battle, really. I want to leave in some flaws. And some people don't believe in that. I also, I have used CG to help things. I've used digital post to paint out rigs and things, which it's great. That it has its use, but I've never stopped questioning, why are we doing stop motion? If we're hiding that too much, there's really no point.
And fundamentally, I mean, you're talking then about Willis O'Brien and Harryhausen, and obviously there's King Kong and Mighty Joe Young, and films like of that era. But fundamentally, in terms of like the actual puppet building, even though the technology has moved on, fundamentally it's the same. It's that metal armature with then the sort of the puppet sort of then built around it. That premise is still the same.
Yeah, they've come up with some variations on how to build the armatures, but yes, at the heart of it, it's you make a skeleton that is posable. I've worked with some of the best puppet makers in the world, and some are based here in England, McKinnon and Saunders in particular.
Yeah.
But yeah, you want to build a great skeleton so that the animator isn't fighting with the puppet all the time. It's hard enough. Why not give them a skeleton that can move elegantly and hold a position? So it starts with that, and then we used to use a type of foam, SRAM, which was very soft, lifelike, but it rotted very quickly, sometimes in as little as 2 years. Then we moved on to silicones and stuff called dragon skin. But we're still making dolls that move with costumes, sometimes real fabric, sometimes we'll mold something that has a texture. But it's ancient. It goes so far back.
And then going back to pre-Sopranos New Jersey, when you're deciding what you're going to sort of study later on, I mean, your interests actually kind of logically led you to animation, actually, didn't they, in terms of the different interests that you had?
It didn't lead me directly. I was one of those kids who was drawing all the time, constantly. I did flip books, but I didn't know, I wasn't buying the monster magazines or, there was a famous one behind the scenes that I just wasn't aware of. But I was drawing a lot. I was into music. Eventually, I went to an art college. I actually did a semester here in London. It used to be called St. Martin's Art School, became part of some larger
Yeah.
thing. And I saw someone doing animation. I thought, they're nuts. That's too much work. But it turned out my interests were very diverse. I was into photography, but never a single photo. I would start to tell stories in like a series of photos. I made some sculpture. Made one with joints. I thought, wouldn't it be cool that people come to see an exhibit and every day it's in a different pose? It was sort of like I was heading there without knowing it.
Isn't that funny? All those three things,
Yeah.
drawing, photography, sculpture, they're all linked to one thing, aren't they?
And music, which is a big part of it for me. Finally, I found, on the local public television station, an experimental animated film. It wasn't even that good. It's not even that memorable. But that was the eureka moment, and I was already 19 or 20 when I saw it, and I realized everything I love comes together in this medium. And then I dove in and learned. I studied up on world animation, a lot of stuff from Eastern Europe, ultimately Jan Schwenkmeyer and others, Yuri Trinka, and the Canadian Film Board. I love their shorts. And one thing led to another, and while I thought I was going to end up making arty short films, I soon realized, well, I can't make a living off that, and took a right turn, I'd say, to Disney.
But before you went to Disney, I mean, you talked about being here in London for a while, but you also went to Cal Arts as well, didn't you? Which is like a legendary arts program in terms of animation and so forth. And is that where you kind of were able to
Cheers.
then, were able to is that where you were able to? Is that where you were able to?
Camden.
Yes, 'cause,
It's worth coming here just for the Camden.
Uxbridge. At Cal Arts, I guess that's where you were kind of developing your own style, and you did. I mean, you started touching it then by talking about the National Film Board of Canada and Zwankmeyer and stuff. I mean, these are more experimental kinds of pictures or films you're making to start.
I was totally naive about how I was going to make a living, and so I was soaking it up more from an art side. But there was the experimental animation program under Jules Engel, and then there was this new Disney program, character animation. Well, I joined into both, and I ended up. My whole career has been about combining those two things. Ended up working at Disney, but I worked with some really talented people.
Who are the people you worked with at Disney?
Well, starting at Cal Arts, I was in class with Brad Bird, who remains a good friend to this day.
You can tell him some people here like him.
John Huggy Bear Lasseter, and John Musker, who he and his partner Ron Clements kind of helped save animation with Little Mermaid and some of the films they did, and many other.
I feel like you're missing somebody out who's quite crucial to one of your films later on.
Well, Tim Burton,
Yeah.
who wore bowling shirts, had short hair. He just seemed very earnest. I had no idea how much talent he had. And then it was revealed when we all got to Disney.
And you worked on like Pete's Dragon and Fox and the Hound and a number of films at this time.
I was in the animation training program under one of the, I don't know if you've heard of the 9 Old Men. They were given the titles by Walt Disney when they were young men, kind of after the Supreme Court that these were the best of the best in the animation world. Eric Larson was our teacher in charge, who really took me under his wing because I didn't get it. All these other kids could draw all the Disney characters, and maybe I did when I was 5 years old. I could draw Mickey Mouse, but I hadn't been pursuing that. He did see something in me, so he took me under his wing and explained, well, here's what we do. It's not that kind of humor. It's about personalities, and saved my life, basically. And then there came a time they needed in-betweeners to help finish the animation on Pete's Dragon. It was a live action with animation film. They'd done many over the years. And I did the best I could on the test. I thought that that's what they needed. But somehow people like Brad Bird, John Musker, they failed. Oh, yeah, we can't do this because they didn't want to interrupt their animation trainee program. I've always been angry about that. They failed on purpose.
Right.
No, I mean, I'll give him a hard time about it today, but it was like another school. I mean, it was a lot of pressure for me to adapt to that style, but I would do things like I became a full animator under Glenn Keane, brilliant
Yeah.
artist, drawing cute foxes, and I was struggling with just this simple walk and stopping, and I'll just leave the head off and add it later. And then I showed the work to Glenn, and he's like horrified. He said, you can't,
For a headless.
it doesn't work that way.
And I guess that kind of macabre edge is what I mean, stop motion and sort of the darker and macabre stories seem to go more hand in hand, don't they, interestingly? And I get, and I think you said that Disney in the end just wasn't for you.
They stop motion, it does fit pretty naturally and can. I mean, like, Jan Svankmajer, Brothers Quay, most of the work I've done, but it also can be, what Wallace and Gromit, it is stop motion using clay.
Yep.
There were these Christmas specials when I was a kid of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and Frosty the Snowman, which were incredibly charming and sweet and cute. But it does, I think, tend to go well with darker subject. Yeah, I was able to finish up a film I had started at CalArts, something called Seepage, which had the first stop motion characters in it that I'd ever done. And Disney supported it. I got a grant to do it. They let me take time off to finish it up. I came back with it. It was a head scratcher for them because it was very much me like trying to make art again. It was just not the time. Disney was floundering. The films, I didn't know what future was going to be there.
And you did some kind of like some ads and a bit of, was it some storyboard work on Return to Oz? And
yeah, I ended up moving to Northern California. There was a film, my old teacher Jules Engel told me about this film called Twice Upon a Time, done in cutout animation. I saw some of it. It was gorgeous. Ultimately, it never really got a release, but it has influenced people. It was showing. It was very funny, very dry, but moved north to do that. Ultimately, worked on commercials and sort of formed my own group. I started doing things for MTV.
Actually,
I don't know if
and I think
included
what I was
those.
going to say, I think it's the MTV things I think people may be most surprised
Yeah.
to know that they were done by you. I mean, when you look at them, you think, oh, well, of course they were done by Henry Selick, but actually a lot of people will recognise those from the time. So maybe this is quite a good time for us to go and watch our first clip, because this is going to show a little bit of Seepage, which is the film we just talked about. It's going to show some of the MTV stuff, and it's also going to show a bit of Slow Bob and the Lower Dimensions. I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
I
a
did
bit
a lot of
later.
work for MTV, like just very, very quick clips, but I got to do whatever I wanted as long as it was cheap and ended with their logo. But they liked it so much, I did a pilot for what was going to be a series, and they picked it up. It was going to be made, and then I got a call from Tim Burton that he'd managed to revive the Nightmare Before Christmas.
Okay, so let's watch that first set of clips, please. So, when you like with the MTV idents that you would do, did you have to deliver them lots of different ideas? And they just picked some, or how did that work? How much?
I would do storyboards initially. I'd give them a few ideas, and then we got in tune with each other, and I would just submit one, and usually they'd like it.
And they were, I mean, obviously, at that time, MTV was coming, like, it was the big thing, wasn't it? So, I mean, globally, so many people would have seen those. It's incredible, isn't it?
I played them over and over and over again. I tried to make them kind of very dense and interesting so that you could stand to see them more than 10 times.
And how many people would be working on one of those?
It sort of started with just me, and then in time, I found some other people to bring in and started to bring a team together. So by the time we did the pilot for Slow Bob, it was like 5 people.
And you called Slow Bob a pilot. Is that because the plan was going to be it could be a TV series?
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that didn't happen. So
Well, it was going to happen, and then I had to turn it down when, Tim, an old friend, had managed to revive this, what had been a very simple idea, Nightmare Before Christmas, to be a feature film, and he was going to be too busy to direct it himself.
And when you look back at Nightmare Before Christmas, we'll talk about it more, but this is a film that just like almost every year it just gets bigger and bigger. It's like a kind of snowball, isn't it? It just gets bigger and bigger. It's huge globally. It's got you go to Japan, I mean, Nightmare Before Christmas is like mind-bogglingly huge. I mean, it's big here, and I guess now that Disney have kind of started playing on Disney Plus and doing all the merchandise and stuff, I guess it was always going to get bigger again. But it's absolutely it's part of our kind of commercial fabric now, isn't it? So our cultural fabric, I mean.
Yeah, but it wasn't always. It was Disney was so afraid it would damage their brand that they didn't release it as a Disney film. Walt Disney Presents, like most of their animation had been. It was Touchstone Pictures, which was another label of theirs. And, I thought we did a great job. It was released. It made its money. It hadn't been a high budget, and then it was gone. But then over the years, people started making their own costumes, their own sculpts, and Disney recognized there's something else going on here. And eventually, it became like a merchandising juggernaut. And then 10 years after we originally made it, it was rechristened Disney's Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas.
And I mean, at the time, did you know that it was so? Obviously, the strange thing, I guess, is sort of the elephant in the room, if you like, about Nightmare Before Christmas is it's marketed as being Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas, but it's actually not directed by Tim Burton. We know that he did the original source material and some of the pictures.
Yeah.
But I mean, how did you feel about the fact that how do you feel about the fact there are people out there who think it's a Tim Burton film when it's a Henry Selick film?
I've won many a bar bet on that knowledge. Who really directed it? I'll bet you £5 it wasn't Tim Burton. Oh yeah, I'll double that. It wouldn't have happened without Tim, his original idea, and he designed the main characters. It's brilliant. Danny Elfman's songs are the best he'll ever do for a film, an animated film. But if it had been right up front, if I'd been told it was going to be called that would be a different issue. But it was renamed about a month before it was coming out. And, Tim has publicly said, not all the time, this is Henry's film. I appreciate that. But it was difficult to get credit for the work that I did with my team, which I'd put together. We were in San Francisco. Tim was in LA. He made 2 other films.
So he was making other films at the time. And was he kind of, I mean, were you still communicating during the process?
Yes, we would send him our story reels. You storyboard everything out, and you cut reels, and we sent everything down. He had absolutely nothing that we changed. He was pretty much all along loved everything. We started with Christmas Town. The first song had been written. It was about What's This? When Jack discovers Christmas Town. The script hadn't quite come together, but we had a few songs, and a deadline. So we started with that, but when we got to Halloween Town, everything sort of slowed down because that was Tim's world. And he sent up Rick Heinrichs, brilliant guy that I'd known for years. He was sort of Tim's original creative partner. He became a very famous production designer. He's won an Academy Award, been nominated, but he's a great sculptor. And he was the guy who saw Tim's sketches and was able to sculpt 3-dimensional versions of them, which was quite a challenging thing. But he sent Rick up to help us nail down the look of Halloween Town. It was, a limited palette, more darks, more blacks, and we made the adjustment. And then after that, really, we got, you get near the end of the film and people get precious, and we had the boogie battle. And I tried a million different versions, and I realized we're never going to sell Tim on any of them, so I just did the one I liked the best. He kind of forgot. I came up with another possible ending, but he wasn't interested in that. And, he came up a few times, mainly for photo ops, but at the very end, he came up with his own editor, Chris Lebenzon. Really smart guy, and they trimmed some things out just to pace it up, simplify things. It's painful because, you do the animation and then it's on the editing floor, but they improved it. And he also, some of the things I put in, if you've heard of the film, maybe you've watched it, Sandy Claus is kidnapped and Jack takes over, but eventually Jack sees the error of his ways and he lets Sandy Claus go just in time to set things right. Well, I wanted to show Sandy Claus setting things right, that these awful, terrifying toys that Jack had delivered to the kids of the world. I wanted those to be clawed back and nice things delivered. Tim hated all those shots, but he was smart enough to show it to friends he trusted. They all loved it, and it was kept.
Well, I know some of our audience is going to stay and watch this film in a minute anyway. I mean, just out of interest, is there anybody who's never seen Nightmare Before Christmas before? Okay, good. Okay, that's we're in the right we're in the right room in that case. So we're going to play a clip from it anyway. Let's play the next clip, which is from Nightmare Before Christmas. Sorry, Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas.
Yeah.
And all of the kind of like, the darkness, the luminous quality of those characters. I mean, you've made it really difficult for yourself in that sequence. I mean, you kind of, from an animation point of view, you didn't make it easy for the animation team, did you?
Why would I?
And you've got the stuff out of his mouth, and you've got, I mean, and you were saying about how the fact that now when you're doing stuff, you can put, you can put a puppet on something to hold it, and then, get rid of it in post.
Yeah.
But you can't. All of that stuff is kind of down to the trickery of the artist, isn't it?
This was, it was very challenging. Back then, all the characters had to be able to support their weight from their feet, from their ankles. Like, for example, Sally, who's maybe a little more voluptuous than Jack, had to have thicker ankles. So I had to put socks on to hide her thicker ankles. And Tim said, well, as long as they have stripes. Okay, I'll put stripes on the socks. But Oogie, he was the most challenging of all the puppets. Just massive, big joints. It was a real wrestling match for the animators to bring him to life. As far as the extra bugs, the glowing colors, those weren't really a big deal at the time. When Oogie battles Jack and he's basically skinned and all his bugs are released, that was the challenge.
And there's a kind of almost like a sort of a Fleischer thing going on with that sort of
Absolutely.
with that sort of Cab Calloway type song, and
That's Danny Elfman. You might have known a little bit about his past of being a rock musician. Oingo Boingo was a band, but there was an earlier iteration of that with his brother called the Mystic Knights of the Oingo Boingo. And they even did a strange feature film, which is worth checking out. But he was heavily influenced by the Cab Calloway songs that were used in the Betty Boop cartoons. So this is directly inspired by that. And I love those too. Those are some of my favorite cartoons ever made. Old Man of the Mountain, Betty Boop's Snow White, a couple of others. So we even added some of those creatures at the very end in 2D animation, galloping in, that are directly from those influences.
And is it true that one of the exercises you set the animators in your team was to start trying to draw with that opposite hand as a way of kind of finding an aesthetic? Was that,
That was only one. That was only one person. There was a very, very talented young artist at the time, always talented, Kelly Asbury. One of those people who grew up, he had a girl's name, and it helped shape him in a way that made him resentful. Okay, I don't know if you've ever heard the song "A Boy Named Sue," a bit like the Johnny Cash song. But he came from Disney, and he just had Disney dripping out of his fingertips. He couldn't help but draw in a Disney style. And I realized he's really talented. What am I going to do, though, to break him of some of these formulaic lines and so forth? And I just took a chance. When I was young, I had injured my hand badly, and not knowing any better, I just switched my other hand and drew with that till the hand healed. I just thought, I'll make him draw with the other hand, see what happens. And it worked. It sort of broke him of those Disney habits, and he got totally in tune with the look of the film and contributed lots and lots of good designs and story art.
And as we're kind of talking about people you worked with and really kind of closely and knew really well, another person who a lot of people would know from sort of subsequent work of Pixar and so forth is Joe Rand, who obviously was taken away very, very young.
Yeah.
But I wonder if you just tell us a little bit about him. I think people would be interested to know.
Yeah, Joe was an amazing work in progress. He is head of story on Nightmare, as well as James the Giant Peach, and went on to be head of story at Pixar, and contributed huge important ideas. He was very much in tune with the sensibility of Nightmare. He and Tim knew each other. And he was someone who, he wasn't someone whose the drawings weren't slick and practiced. He struggled, but the ideas were so strong, it never mattered if the drawings weren't as perfect as someone else's. He had a good twisted sense of humor when it was called for. Contributed things like the hanging tree that walks along with the skeletons hanging from its branches. Yeah. But the best thing he did was he was the leader of that group and guided. It was a very small story team. Really, 3 people storyboarded the whole film, with a couple of people showing up to help out now and then. That's a small number for a feature film. And yeah. Joe was the leader. Oh, there's like a particular moment, and there's hundreds in the film that came from Joe, but where Jack has discovered Christmastown, and he's walking around, taking it all in, being very excited, and he grabs a string of colored lights and puts them in front of his eyes, and 2 of the lights sort of are where his eyes are. It's just a gorgeous little moment, and that was one of hundreds of things that came from Joe.
And in stop motion terms, and in your own career's terms, I suppose, the turnaround between Nightmare Before Christmas and James and the Giant Peach was actually quite quick, wasn't it? In terms of, it was like a 3-year period between one coming out and the next.
Yeah, it was surprisingly quick, but we struggled to put a studio together, and I told Tim, I said, let's see if we can come up with something else. And it was actually Joe who suggested James the Giant Peach. It's a little different. While Tim was a producer, it wasn't his own story, so he was not as engaged. I had more interference from Disney, not in animation, this live action.
And you were directing live action sequences as well?
Yeah, we have live action bookends. And so it was, in Nightmare, I'd say 99.9% of all the efforts are on the screen. In James, it's more like 75%, because I had just an executive, horrible human named David Vogel. Hope he's in hell. Oh, he was drummed out of Hollywood by everyone he ever worked with. Just one of those people shows up unexpectedly. You give him a deadline. David, would love to get your notes by this day. And we'd always give him plenty of time. We'd always wait at least one day till after. We would have said, if you give him after, it's going to cost. And he said, these are my notes, and it will not cost anymore. Anyway, so there was a bit of a drain to placating that guy.
Yeah.
And but we did manage to get another one up. But the main thing that happened is, while we're making the film, Toy Story came out, and it changed the world. Everyone was able to say, oh, it's that CG, that's why it's good. Well, it didn't hurt the film that it was CG, but it was great because it's an incredible story. Lasseter and his main team of people, Joe Ranft, Andrew Stanton, Pete Docter, and other very, very talented people. That was their first shot to prove what they could do, like Nightmare had been for me and my stop motion folks. But it came out and changed the world, and stop motion for a while just wasn't going to get supported as it had been previously.
And in James the Giant Peach, we're not going to watch the sequence, but one of the sequences in there is James's Nightmare, which actually, in a way, feels more experimental than the other parts of the film. It almost feels like your little sort of Trojan horse, if you like, because you kind of managed to get it in there. Back to the old Henry kind of experimental days. Yeah,
I got it in, and people from Disney said, oh, you could just cut that. You don't need that. But because I didn't have to, I left it in.
And what we're going to do is that the next clip we've done, we've kind of put 2 clips together. One actually is from 2004, which is from this Life Aquatic, which is the sequence that you were responsible for. And we've also got this bit from James the Giant Peach, which goes underwater. So we thought we'd try and sort of put the 2 together for a little underwater combo. So we'll come back into about that moment. So should we watch the next clip?
Life Aquatic was a Wes Anderson film.
Sorry.
He hired me and a small team to create stop motion creatures for it. It was a lot of fun. Really wonderful to work with Wes on that. How big was that shark?
How big was that shark, Henry?
7 feet. I know you're all meters, but it's maybe 2.5 meters.
That's a big shark.
Yeah.
So if I'm not mistaken, that might be just Jack Skellington who made an appearance in James the Giant Peach there.
Indeed, he was there. It was all legal because Disney actually
Of course
backed
they-
that film.
Just in terms, just going back to the whole thing around sort of, like live action and
Just one
stop
second, I
motion.
just
Yeah,
want
of
to interrupt
course.
briefly.
No, of course.
Ray Harryhausen visited us when we were doing that. There was a lot of other creatures, sea turtles, a sugar crab,
Yeah.
a crayon ponyfish, but he visited us as we were animating that shark, and he actually brought tears to his eyes to see stop motion used for special effects in a live action film. It was wonderful.
And were you doing that in the way that he would have done it technically, in terms of the fusing of the live action with the stop motion together?
No,
and
we
stuff?
weren't. We weren't doing the fusing. We were just shooting the elements, and it was fused digitally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you were approaching that though, were you still animating though in the traditional sense? It was all like, 'cause we didn't show it in that clip there, but there were some other little moments with some other sea creatures and turtles and things. But all of they were all modelled and created in the same way.
Yeah, 90% done the traditional way. We actually did a few underwater puppets shot with overcrank cameras, and the shark, it was supported on rigs that had to hold the weight.
And obviously, Wes Anderson's no stranger to stop motion as a form,
Yeah.
and we know that obviously he directed a couple of films. But how was he to work with? Did he kind of leave you alone, or was he kind of all over it? How did that work?
He shot the film in Rome at the Cinecittà, famous studios where, what's his name? The greatest.
Fellini.
Yeah, Fellini. Fellini shot a lot of his movies. And so I got to fly over there, show him sketches, go through storyboards with him, and but then come back to a little studio where we'd set up near San Francisco, and we'd show him things, send him things, and he'd give us notes. But he wasn't heavily involved as he was when he directed Mr. Fox and The Isle of Dogs. He wasn't performing characters for us that we were to follow.
And how big a team would you have had for the stuff you did on this Live Aquatic?
Between the puppeteers for the live action and the people who build it and animators, maybe 12 or 15. It wasn't all of them all the time, but it was a small team. It was very pleasurable. It was really nice.
Now, what time did you become aware of the book Darktown? Is it Darktown?
Darktown, yeah. It was something left at the studio, just a cold submission of a graphic novel when I was working on James the Giant Peach. I sort of had a cool look and a good idea, I thought. It was my lesson in filmmaking. It's a film that was a bomb. It was meant to have a lot more animation than it ended up having.
Because it became Monkeybone.
Yes, it became Monkeybone, this artist who's in a coma, and his imagination is a living character as a briefcase. It turned into a monkey character that he'd created as a cartoonist.
And what you'd learned from directing live action in James the Giant Peach, did that help in terms of what you then needed to do at Monkeybone?
It didn't help so much. James the Giant Peach was all done in the Bay Area. We shot the live action. The Bay Area is San Francisco. It's just what we call it. But with Monkeybone, the powers that be insisted to be shot in L.A. And suddenly I'm in a milieu I'm just not familiar with, that live action world and being tested, and a lot of the animation had gone away, and it was more about live action. It was. I'll just share this one lesson I learned, that it's a slippery slope. Sometimes saying yes to keep a project going is a huge mistake, and it just goes back to early on in that process. But once you start down the slippery slope, you tend to still say yes to things you know aren't good, they aren't right.
But are you saying that because you wanted to be best in the world? Because actually, a lot of people really loved the film, and it's definitely got a following.
We have some.
And it sounds
some
like you're
fans.
almost being down because it wasn't
I'd
what you
love to
wanted
do a
to be.
director's cut and put all the animation back.
And we're going to show a clip for Monkeybone, and then we'll come back and continue this in a minute.
Sure.
Let's show the clip for Monkeybone.
Thanks.
It was my colleague Josh who chose that clip, and it is a good clip. And I think that, as I say, I wonder sometimes when you've made a film that you've obviously put so much into, and it hasn't gone necessarily the way that you wanted to go in terms of people have changed things, or you've had to make compromises that you didn't want to do. I wonder whether in your head you kind of soured it more. Because I say, I think there's a big audience out there who actually really loved the film and remember when they watched it. And I just wonder one thing, obviously, because so much of your life has been working with animation, and the obviously the voice actors that you work with have to be directed. But I guess when you're used to dealing with a puppet, that you just move them however you want to be, and you can release your inner actor. When you're dealing with real actors, they're not so malleable, are they? I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Some are not malleable. When I'm recording voice actors, most of them are from live action, and some come in with the notion that, oh, I'm just doing a voice for a cartoon, that'll be easy. And no, it's not easy, and they usually adjust, like Terry Hatcher adjusted very quickly and wonderfully. When she's doing the other mothers for Coraline. But this was hard. Here's a couple of things that happened. Don't spend forever on a movie. There's a chance the regime will be changed and you haven't finished. And the new regime will come in and they'll either decide to gut the movie and change everything or dump it because they don't want to get, blamed for it. That happened with
Happens a lot,
Monkeybone.
actually, doesn't it?
It happens a lot. Bill Mechanic, who's a great executive, he was the head of 20th Century Fox. He believed in the film and was supporting the film, but he'd also made Fight Club with David Fincher, who's an old friend of mine. And good old Rupert Murdoch said, I don't like you taking chances like this. I only want Titanic. Even Something About Mary, which was a huge hit, was considered risky. But ultimately, he got rid of Bill, and a new person came in and had the marching orders. We make things safer, we do this, we do this. So that was an issue. The other thing is, try not to work with an up-and-coming star who's, while you're making your movie, they have a breakout film and they're told they're the new Harrison Ford, and their ego swells up to a point where they're not even going to listen to the slightest suggestion you might make. Now, Brendan Fraser and I have made up. We both were in the wilderness for a while. He made his comeback, but I had a reunion with him a couple of years ago and with some of the other live.
Was that quite cathartic, actually, having had that experience, which obviously was something that had been playing in your mind to then reunite?
It was great. Yeah, there was a big thing in Hollywood where it's the Critics' Choice Awards, which is kind of the best awards because the movie critics get to choose. My last film, Wendell Wild, was nominated, didn't win. It was nominated, I was there, and Giancarlo Esposito, Bob Odenkirk, both of whom were in my Monkeybone film, along with Brendan. They were all there and all nominated for different things. They all won, and we had a little wonderful reunion.
And over in Portland, Oregon, the Will Vinton Studios was kind of coming to an end, and Leica was then sort of starting to, the early sort of seedlings, if you like.
Yeah.
And you went and worked with them, not on a stop motion project though. Initially, it was a short CG film. Could you just tell us about that?
Yeah. My manager at the time, who's gone on to be a producer, Ellen Goldsmith-Vane, somehow she was approached. They were looking for someone with more experience. They were going to do more short films and then branch out into feature films. And they had their own original idea called Moon Girl. I read it was a cute story, and I didn't even know about Travis. No one filled me in. I spoke to his dad, Phil Knight, and I just said, well, why are you doing this, Phil? And what do you want? He says, I want to win. And okay, whatever that means. But I agreed. I came up and kind of reworked the story of Moon Girl. And we ended up with a very family-friendly, cute little movie. It won awards at family festivals and so forth. But part of the deal was when I said, I'll come up if I can develop, Coraline in particular, because I hadn't been able to find a home for it anywhere in Hollywood. Too scary for kids, not scary enough for adults. but some people at the studio had read my script and they really wanted to do it. One thing led to another. Travis, who I got to meet, and well, holy shit, he's one of the best animators in the world. At that time, he's no less an animator, but he went on to become a director and run the studio and everything else. We had a lot of hurdles to clear, but the final hurdle was Phil Knight telling me, okay, well, if you can find a distributor, I'll back the film. I don't think he thought I could find a distributor, but animators are relentless. We don't give up. We'll still be going when the world has ended. We'll still be bringing puppets to life.
We look at your knuckles. They have knocked on lots of doors, haven't they?
Yeah, and so I found a distributor, Focus Films, which was known for doing edgy content, taking chances, and so they became our distributors, and we built a studio which was named Leica. It became Leica, and sort of laid the foundation for that company and made the first film.
And because Leica, I guess, is like a kind of temple to stop motion, working on that first film, which was CG, was that useful though? Because obviously, with the digital revolution meant that you could still concentrate on stop motion, but you could have digital elements. Did that help?
It convinced me to have no CG if I could help it. For a variety of reasons. But I didn't like the culture. It was too much like when I was back at Disney doing in-betweens. You're sitting all day, you're part of a pipeline, you don't have much autonomy. So I didn't like the culture behind it. I didn't like the CG team I was saddled with. And when Travis got on board with the idea that it could all be stop motion, it was like, hallelujah. And I purposely used the least amount of CG possible in the film because I don't know, I've mentioned this a few times the last few days, so if I'm repeating myself, I apologize, but there's a few scenes, the Jumping Mice Circus, where Bobinski in the other world has trained mice. They play instruments, they jump in formations like a marching band. Yeah, we could have used CG and it would have been a mediocre, unmemorable scene, but I wanted to make it stop motion. I wanted to use techniques that George Powell had developed in the 40s of the whole character being replaced in a cycle. So you'd use it over and over again as they hopped up and down and played a trombone or a cornet or whatever. And I got the support to do that. And I'm really proud of it. It's you're up close. It's a little crude in the best possible way. Something else, the Scotty Dog Theater.
So that is my absolute favourite scene, to be honest. I think those Scotty dogs in that theatre, and the fact that they were all made by hand. You didn't go and do any kind of jiggery pokery there. They are all functioning made dog puppets, aren't they? 100 and however many of them.
Now I've never known what jiggery pokery really means. Is that an obscene term? Is it?
I hope not in this context.
Is it like odds and sods?
It could be.
Okay. No.
But what you could have done is you could have very easily just done it like in a kind of crowd scene way, which is going to just take those row of dogs, just duplicate them, and they were all made, weren't they?
Yeah, we made hero dogs, the dogs that get featured in close shots. They could do more. The ones that weren't, they were very limited. They could nod their heads and maybe move. But I love those Scotty dogs. They'd been, I came up with that idea of the old ladies that they stuffed all their dead dogs. And when a dog was ill, they'd kind of like, well, you'll soon be wearing your angel wings. And so I love the dogs. I love seeing them there. And even when they're evil, they're bat dogs, they're still cute.
They are. And you talked about sort of trying to downplay the technology side of things on Coraline. But one thing you did really embrace was that sort of stereoscopic 3D, which was a very new thing, and it was kind of groundbreaking in terms of the way you used it.
Yeah, it was mainly not going overboard on embracing CG. We used it a couple of spots, but absolutely, because I was aware that 3D was coming back to cinemas. I knew the inventor of it, Lenny Lipton, and so I was aware it was coming back. There would be a new system. It was going to look great. And so early on, when it was viable to do so, I convinced the powers that be, let's shoot it in 3D. That'll be the Wizard of Oz idea, going from a kind of a flat gray world where Coraline is somewhat miserable into a colorful, rich, deep world of 3D.
Shall we watch a clip from Coraline? Obviously, it's just about to be re-released now in its new restored version with the 3D restored as well. And I think you're happy with that, aren't you, with the new one?
I'm very happy. It was really planned very carefully, shot in 3D to be seen in 3D, and it hasn't really been possible for a number of years. So if you have the opportunity, I really would recommend you see it. It's also with the original company, Real D.
And that was his company's, Larry's company, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I should say, having now then built that up, we're not going to watch it in 3D, and we're not going to watch the restored version either. So let's look at the old.
It's perfectly fine. Why give it away for free?
Exactly.
But I'll just say that I got incredible support back on Nightmare. But at the end of the day, it's like Tim Burton. This is the second time in my career I got total creative support and maybe a little more credit. I'm so grateful for that support, for Travis and for Leica, and for a fucking incredible team that came together to make this film.
So we're now going to watch a scene from Henry Selick's Coraline. And it's such a beautiful sequence. And actually, it really resonates well for anybody who's going to go up to the exhibition at some point that we've got over the next couple of months. That scene is a really pivotal scene to the exhibition, isn't it?
Yeah, they've got examples of how various scenes, like all their films, were what it took to put them together, and so they've got some beautifully lit props and behind the scenes pull-out drawers and learn more about it. Yeah, it's well represented at the exhibit here. And
one thing I've heard you talk about before, which I'm always intrigued by, because it's definitely a sense that I have in the industry generally, is that you're a filmmaker, you're a director, but somehow people who work in animation and directors and so forth are seen almost as being kind of like other. You've got sort of proper filmmakers who are like the live action filmmakers and the other group of the kind of the animation directors. And it seems weird because obviously it's very labor intensive and detailed work. It takes the patience of a saint presumably to make those films. And a lot of them, when they're done right, they can really have big returns as well. So do you have a sense of why it is that people behave like that, or what it is in the industry that, am I being right? Am I right to say that there is that?
You're totally right, but it's all animation. I know people, Andrew Stanton, one of the greatest animation directors of all time, Brad Bird, one of the greatest. They both did live action films. Andrew had one very unsuccessful film. Yeah. Brad did one that was successful, one unsuccessful. Because they weren't getting the respect they deserved in animation. You'd go to gatherings, your films are nominated for whatever, and I'd like you to meet the director, and actors, whoever they might be, come up with smiles, and then your animation. It's just how it is. It's not sexy, it's not glamorous. I never cared. I think we're so lucky to get to do what we do, and sometimes you do it right, it's released at the right time, it finds its fans, and the best of all is when, over a long period of time, first with Nightmare 30 years ago, and now with Coraline 15 years ago, the audiences have grown ever larger.
And in Coraline, from a soundtrack point of view, because obviously the soundtrack is so important, that kind of music and visuals, which works so well in Nightmare Before Christmas. And you've got Bruno Coulet, who's incredible of taking you to incredible, fantastic worlds. Yeah. He did those incredible insect documentaries and the winged migration with the birds, and takes you into worlds you never thought. And you've got Bruno Coulet, but you've also got the Maybe Giants somewhere in the mix. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that collaboration.
Yeah, finding the right person to do the music for this was very, very difficult. What do you do? Well, there's people you know already, and if they're not right, you're not going to reach out to them. So you listen to all the soundtracks you can. You go to like the favorites, the Thomas Newmans and 10 others that have, they do great work. But it was very hard to find someone who, in my opinion, could sort of show the true spirit of being a child, which is terrifying and wonderful, kind of often at the same time. And it was, I'd seen Winged Migration, a documentary he did the sounds for, still an incredible nature film. And then this guy I've worked with on many films, he said, well, check out Microcosmos, the world of bugs. And when I just put on the first bit of music, I realized this is the guy. It's a hidden world that he brings music to. And it's very original. Bruno's a huge, if you like the film, he's a huge part of why you like it. He also, the typical thing is a composer comes out at the very end and you've put together a temp soundtrack. You borrow and steal from all these other movies just to have something to play with your film when you're editing it all together, and then you pay a lot of money to some composer comes in and basically just reworks your temp soundtrack to make it original enough that it's not a ripoff. Bruno was involved for 2 years.
Right.
He wanted to be involved. He would send themes. For a long time, I was trying to get the rights to a semi-popular song for Coraline's theme as she explores the house, and I could never get it. They ended up, the artist sold it for like a laundry commercial. But Bruno did something better. His version, it was better than I ever could have wished for. And They Might Be Giants, they're a pop band. They've been around for decades and decades, and I still admire them greatly. They actually did the score for that short film, that CG film that I did, Moon Girl. So I got to know them a bit. And the plan was that they would do more on this as well. And the idea that it might even have 5 or 6 more musical numbers. But what I found with them, it was impossible to collaborate. Anything I told them, any idea I told them, it just made it worse. They're used to, they do their own thing. I mean,
Which is like you as well. I guess you both
Yeah.
are people who are doing your own thing and are used to that. And then therefore, how do you
Yeah,
move forward?
it was just, it became very awkward, and ultimately it felt like we're forcing it to be something it's not meant to be. I still think there's a great feature to be made if I could cherry pick the existing They Might Be Giant songs to go in it, like 12 of them, that it would work well and be important. But they did end up doing the one very brief but perfect moment of the other father being played by a piano. You know, he's just making up a song about Coraline. She's a friend of mine, and it's feels very much like it's just improvised. And between the song, the performance by John Linnell, who sounded enough like our voice that I wanted to stay with him, and the animation, it's mind-blowing how cool and good that animation is. There's like moments where there's multiple hands, more hands than you realize are playing the piano. Jeff Riley, one of the greats of all time, animated that scene. But yeah, I'm still very grateful for that one song. They always say, well, we wanted to do more.
Who knows what the future may hold?
Right.
And then you moved back to San Francisco and you set up a studio there.
Yeah.
Which was called, was it Cinderbiter Studio?
Yeah.
Production. And you worked a project, I don't think, so is it A Tale of Dark and Grim? Is that, is that not?
That wasn't the one.
Okay. And then it was a Shadow King.
Yeah, we're trying to develop different things. After Coraline, rather than stay on it Leica, I was given an opportunity I ran into John Lasseter when we were mixing the sound for Coraline down in the Bay Area, which is where the people I know, where I've worked with over the years, and he saw it and he thought, wow, you should come and see me. And I did, and the idea was, we'll set you up as an animation studio, your budgets have to be lower, and blah, blah, blah. It seemed like, well, great, my home base is that region. And there were several things that we pitched. There was an existing book called Edward Tulane, which, just didn't register, but I'd had this other story I'd worked on for a while that was ultimately became the Shadow King, about a boy who he turns his disadvantage to an advantage in being able to create living shadows. His mangled looking, messed up hands, with training by a living shadow girl, become elegant instruments. And by the way, the name of the studio, Cinderbiter, I want to just share that idea. It came from Joe Ranft. Anyone know what a Cinderbiter is here? It's from Viking legends. Well, supposedly the Vikings would indulge young men who hadn't figured out who they were or what kind of a warrior they might want to be. Maybe they want to be a farmer. The young men, ages from, it could be 16 to even 25, they would just get drunk every night, pass out by the fire, biting cinders until they found themselves. And they always did. And so I just love that image and that idea.
Being a cinderbiter.
Yeah.
So the Shadow King didn't make it in the end. It's fair to say, and I don't know whether that's a kind of once again a control thing, because I guess John Lasseter is somebody who's used to doing things in a very particular way.
Yeah, what I didn't realize was John, when he says he loves something, that he's implying, but I'd love it more if I was involved. So, all his so-called love for Coraline and then setting up a deal to work with me and bringing a team together again was how much more successful my movie might have been if he'd been involved. It really came down to, we had a budget to work with, and it was plenty of money to do damage, good damage. But he couldn't help himself. He just changed things over and over and over. His approach is, I want to see every permutation, every possibility that there could be.
Right.
And we've actually hired a crew, and we're starting to animate.
And that's presumably quite an expensive way of working as well.
Yeah, and so the numbers were going up to the point where it was going to be impossible in our budget. So it was like worst day, kind of the best day of my life of when it was shut down. I couldn't take it anymore of being. My reward for doing a good film, Coraline, is you're going to be messed with every day for the rest of your life.
The good news for us is there's still some footage that was made that we can watch now.
And I got the rights back after a few years. Disney then give them back, but for not very much money. If I set it up again, I could make it again. But
we're using this footage we're going to see as well. If you want
I can't use any of the footage. I can't use anything that was made, but I can use my original story.
And what about the puppets? Do they still exist?
No, they don't exist.
Okay, let's watch the clip we have from The Shadow King.
Yes, I admit those hands aren't as cute as Dumbo's big ears. But
I guess the kind of the happy ending in a way is that you have the rights back to the project.
yeah,
Who knows that most will be in the audience today? There could, the good thing is that I think by talking about it and people knowing that, you just don't know what could happen in the future, do you? And let's keep our fingers crossed. Not those fingers. And then the even happier ending is that actually when that was kind of behind you, there was another film that has now been made. And it wasn't, unfortunately, and I guess that's part of the Netflix model, it didn't kind of get seen a huge amount at the cinema, certainly here, but it did get released and it went to Netflix, and it's another big stop motion production again, isn't it? Wendell Wild.
Yeah, I got to work, sort of co-create it from an original idea of mine with Jordan Peele, who was part of the Key and Peele comedy duo for years. They did some of the funniest stuff I've ever seen, him and Keegan-Michael Key, who then went on to become a horror director. And I got to meet him, and we hit it off, and we developed this, and we did have a regime change.
There was a regime change.
There was a regime change, and it was, we had COVID. We had...
I guess that was a big thing about this film, was that
we had to shut down.
COVID was, and making a stop motion film with COVID going on. I guess on one hand, you can be locked away in your studio, but it actually doesn't really work that way.
No, it doesn't work. We did what we could. I could work with editorial and work with story artists, voice recordings. but it really did shut us down for at least 9 months, and then we slowly came back with all the masks and testing and all that sort of thing. So I'm very proud of the film for what the crew was able to do. It needed to be longer, and it needed Netflix to actually push it. They got behind Guillermo's wonderful Pinocchio, but that's the only film they kind of supported from the stop motion menu.
And when you look at, so in terms of when you look at what it was, the main thing from your point of view is you just need a bit more time to tell the story. But apart from that, but you must be pleased with it, aren't you?
I'm pleased with it. It's it's risk taking. It's definitely woke in a way that certain critics hate. I don't care. It took on some real issues, including for-profit prisons, which didn't make a huge deal of it, but that's what the villains do: incarceration for a profit.
Yeah.
And
is it true that the two demons, the idea from that originally came from your sons?
yeah, not the design, which are caricatures of Key and Peele, because we got both of them to do voices. But at one point, when my grown sons were very young, I just did a funny drawing of them as demons, because that's what they seemed like. The younger one was still in his stinky diapers, which he hated changing. And it just was something tucked away, and then I developed a whole story, and that was something I shared with Jordan when he wanted to know what kind of ideas I had.
Well, we're going to finish in a moment, but let's watch a clip from Wendell Wild. Now we'll just finish off and just talk a little bit more Wendell Wild. Let's watch that clip, please.
You notice the faces of the demons. They're not replacement. They're fully mechanical. I just wanted them to feel rubbery and stretchy. And
what about the hands?
the hands are, they're not replacement either.
But were they like? I mean, in terms of like the scale of the hands, though, compared to the puppets, were they kind of particularly?
Well, they came in different sizes. The puppets weren't gigantic. They weren't that scale. Although at one point in the film, we have a giant demon's hands that were like 10 feet.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. I wondered whether it was that scene.
Yeah, not that scene. But when the father comes after his demon sons, and they have to be in his hands.
And the one thing you talked about earlier was that you can have a character who now is like literally walking on high-heeled shoes, whereas before, if you'd done that in the sort of Nightmare Day, you'd have to have all these invisible strings and stuff, and it wouldn't probably work. But now, with the technology being what it is, you can make that work properly, and it's not causing as much of a problem.
You just have an overhead rig, like some kind of a track and a metal arm coming down that attaches to the puppet and takes the weight. You can control maybe some up and down movement if that's how their walk is going to go. And that wasn't a possibility. In fact, it was jarring to me on Wendell Wild, because that had been so fully embraced. Can any of these puppets support their weight? Didn't make sense for the most part. But it just gave us, Oogie Boogie would have been it wouldn't have been quite the battle if we could have taken some of that weight off his ankles, which are really massive, to support that.
And when you think about Wendell Wild, I like the fact that, as I understand it, you used a lot of first-timers in the production, so giving that kind of opportunity out to people in the industry. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Obviously, thinking about sort of succession planning and bringing people into the industry.
The two animation supervisors, the supervising animators, were Malcolm Lamont and Jeff Riley, people from Leica that had worked on Coraline and then everything since then. They had this proposal: if I made them supervisors, they'd be able to train new people. They'd be able to spot new talent. And they did. They did a fantastic job. It's not as if all the animation is at a genius level, but the performances are. They're believable.
Yeah.
And I always love the idea of giving people a shot. There's always going to be kids growing up who want to do stop motion. It's direct. They have a doll. They have clay, a free program. They can shoot it on their phone. But they're always going to be out there, and I love trying to give them an opportunity.
And I know that in a number of years we're going to be sitting on the stage talking about the Shadow King, having hopefully previewed it before people see it. But so there's plenty more films to come. But when you think about, going back back in the day when you were making those first steps into making stop motion, is there anything that you wish you'd known back then that Henry now could tell himself?
A couple of things. One is ignorance is bliss. That when we did Nightmare Before Christmas, we were so happy. This group of people that I'd grown to help me out on the MTVs, and then a series of TV commercials with something called the Pillsbury Doughboy, this weird little larval eunuch that would get poked in the stomach and laugh, but it was a great team building effort. That when we had the opportunity to do Nightmare, we didn't see any of the possible problems. We were just so happy. I mean, we were like imbeciles, just grinning. And most people were that way most of the time. It was hard as hell.
Yeah.
People have to put in crazy hours. Things would break. And, we had to build light alarms because someone might go to lunch and one of the bulbs will burn out on one of their sets. There might be 15 lights on a set, practicals. They don't notice it burned out. They finish shooting, and then in the middle of the shot, the light goes out. We had to invent light alarms so we knew if that happened. Blah blah blah. But it just things were meant to be. Things came together with Tim and Danny's songs, et cetera, et cetera. Later, what I learned was there'll be a point where saying yes will be a huge mistake. And even if it guts the project, it's worth saying no. There's a chance it won't gut the project, and it will save the project from going down a path it was never meant to go down, which is something that happened on Monkeybone. Even though, end of the day, it's still a cool movie, and I still want to put the animation back in it. But I've gotten the kind of support I need a couple of times, and those are the most successful films. So I have learned I'm not a complete idiot. I do know how to pick talent and write scenes, develop characters, and I trust myself enough, not by myself, but with a great group of artists and other storytellers and so forth. Maybe trusting myself a little earlier would have been helpful. I mean, the thing is, anyone who's making films, especially when you're a student, in your student days, take the chances then. You get a chance to do something independent. Don't play it safe to get a job. Do something that's going to stand out. Maybe you'll get recognized. Maybe you'll get support to do more of what you love to do.
And one thing that's impossible to quantify, there's no calculation possible to put this into words, really. But your films have connected with so many people all over the world. There are people in different corners of the world who you will never meet and who will never come to the US or the UK or whatever. But their days or their lives sometimes have been changed hugely by watching your films. And you brought so much joy to so many people. Obviously, that is why we're all here today. And I just want to say a massive, massive thank you for being here to Henry Selick. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm very, very grateful that there's an appreciation for some of the work I've done. So happy to have inspired others to take up the mantle. Stop motion, it's never going to be, that's how to make animation, like the way to go. I think it'll always be an outlier that comes back into focus, goes out, back into focus. But I can't think of a better way to make a film.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.